So welcome to today's podcast. I got a really good one for you guys today. I know I'm a little biased. I say that about every single episode, but I think that this one is going to be especially good for you guys. We're going to talk about the grace-mercy combo that can only be found in Christianity. I don't know exactly what I'm going to title this podcast episode just yet, and so it's probably going to have grace in the title. It's probably going to have mercy in the title, and it's probably going to have the word combo in the title, but I'm just not sure yet what I'm going to title it. So you guys will know that actually when you hear that, of course, when you hear this, of course. But I really hope you guys enjoy today's piece. I really hope and pray that God speaks to you through this podcast to show you a little bit about His grace, to show you a little bit about His mercy that can only be found through His Son Jesus. So without further ado, here is the grace-mercy combo piece. I really hope you guys enjoy. So nowhere else in the world, right, outside of Christianity and the gospel, do grace and mercy coexist in the following way. It is so unique. It is so countercultural that it is incredible. So that's what I want to focus on here today. So grace, if you think about the standard definition of grace, it would be simple elegance or refinement of movement. Now, I fancy myself a pretty graceful guy, so this comes very naturally to me. But biblical grace is unmerited favor that God gave to humanity. So that's quite different, right? I mean, you have the standard definition being just elegance and refinement and polish. And then you have the biblical definition, which has nothing to do with any of that. And it's just God's favor on humanity. Unmerited favor. Right? We didn't do anything to earn it. We didn't do anything to basically put God in a situation where He is indebted to us. Like, it's nothing of that nature. It is a pure gift on His part. Now, grace exists in other religions too. Grace exists in many of the other belief systems in the world, but never in the done-for-you way that it is through Jesus. So, in other belief systems, grace usually shows up as it shows up to inspire virtuous impulses, to impart strength, to endure trial and resist temptation, and as an individual virtue or excellence of divine origin, according to Wikipedia, so we can assume that it is correct. And so you can see that it's very different from the biblical version of grace. The biblical version of grace is it's done. The other version of grace that is found in various other belief systems is here's some strength, here's some grace, now go do. That's very, very different. Now mercy is compassion or forgiveness shown towards someone whom it is within one's power to punish or harm. Biblical mercy is basically God restrains from sending His wrath down to us. He restrains from basically punishing us for what we did. Right? Because remember, it all traces back to the Garden of Eden. It all traces back to Adam and Eve. It all traces back to the decision that they made to introduce original sin into the world, right? God didn't make them do that. God didn't ask them to do that. He gave them free will so they could make that choice. But it is effectively all sourced back to original sin. And so because of that original sin, and because God hates sin so much, there has to be punishment. There has to be a penalty. There has to be. Otherwise, then what are we doing, right? Otherwise, what's the big deal? Why does any of this even matter? Right? It's like, you sinned, forget about it. It's not a big deal. No, that can't be. That can't be the answer from God's vantage point. So, He could send His wrath down on us. He could send, the 7 plagues back down onto us. He could send His wrath, which is the word I was kind of looking for there and failed to find. He could send that all down to us easily. Right? He's God. He can do whatever He wants. But He decided to have mercy on us. He chose to have mercy on us and to send that wrath, the wrath that had to be sent, the wrath that needed to be showered down onto or into or over the world, however you want to put it, the wrath that had to be given out, he did it to Jesus, right? He put it all on Jesus' shoulders. He put it all on Jesus' body when Jesus hung from the cross. And so that wrath had to go somewhere, and God had mercy on us, and he gave it to Jesus instead. And so if we put these two things together, grace and mercy, in a biblical context, this combo pack, this 1-2 punch, you won't find it anywhere else in the world. You won't find it anywhere else in any other faith or belief system. All right, so through the gospel, we have grace and mercy, right, together, simultaneously, inextricably linked in a way that we can't find anywhere else. Well, if we go a little bit further, let's kind of explore each one individually now. Let's look a little bit more closely at grace. With grace, this is the foundation of our faith, God's grace. And if we actually look at Scripture itself, we can we could look at this in a number of places in the biblical, in the text. But let's turn to Ephesians 2, verses 8 and 9. So, Ephesians 2, 8 and 9. For it is by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not from yourselves. It is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. So you've probably heard that verse or those verses before. They're quite famous. Even if you're not a believer, even if you're a non-Christian, you've probably heard those verses before. So let's unpack a few things that are going on inside of those verses that I find to be really important and instrumental to understanding God's grace. The grace of God is a gift. It is a free gift. Free. F-R-E-E. There's no compensation involved. There's no payment that's expected. There's no quid pro quo that is required of us. Right? There's no reciprocity that needs to take place. It's freely given to us, it, of course, being salvation. It being eternity with him. His son, Jesus, forever in heaven. So that is the it that we're talking about here, right? That is the object of the sentence. That is the object of our faith, right? It is having an opportunity to spend forever with God in eternity. We have that by grace. By grace. By the unmerited favor of God. We have that. Paul goes on to clarify in the verse that this is not by our works. So not only does he say that it is the gift of God, right? He says that at the end of verse 8, it is the gift of God. Like, those are literally the words that he uses. But then he opens up verse 9 by saying, not by works, so that no one can boast. And so Paul really wants to nail the point home here. That, all right, listen, you have to understand grace correctly. This is given to you. This is freely given to you. You don't have to pay it back. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to do something to even the score. There is no debt involved. Jesus paid the entire debt. Jesus paid the entire bill, right? Jesus did it all. It is finished. And so for us to understand grace correctly and fully, we need to understand that. And so we just did a piece back in episode 153, and I'll link to this down in the show notes. We just did a piece about how working hard can never satisfy you. The works that we're focusing on here, this is not really that. That was very specifically related to kind of working hard and doing your best and kind of wrapping up your identity in your work, right? Here, Paul is just talking about works in a general sense. I suppose they are linked. I suppose there is certainly a connection between the two. But Paul's really just talking about works in just the more overarching theme of works. And he's just reminding us for maybe, I don't know, the 35th time in Ephesians alone that we can't earn our way into heaven. We could never do enough to earn God's favor. It's given to us through Jesus. That's the only way. And so it couldn't be any clearer when we look at Ephesians 2, 8, and 9. And so no one can boast, right? No one can boast. No one can feel superior to anyone else. I can't say to my neighbor, hey, I did X, Y, and Z, and you only did X, so I'm better than you. I can't say to my wife, hey, I did A, B, and C, and I'm keeping score in a Google spreadsheet, and you haven't done anything. What's going on here? We can't do that. None of us can do that. That's what Paul is reminding us of here in these verses, right? No one can boast. We are all equal in God's eyes. We are all the same in God's eyes. We are all sinful by nature, right? We are all evil by nature. And by God's grace alone, that is given freely to each and every one of us, it's given to you, it's given to me. We are saved. And that's good because we are in desperate need of God's grace. Okay, so that's grace. Right? But now let's turn our attention to mercy. And you layer on a little mercy on top of that grace. And man, like I said, you've got a really potent little 1-2 punch that is unmatched anywhere else. Anywhere else on this earth, anywhere else outside this earth, anywhere else in any other worldview or belief system of this earth or anything beyond. You won't find this anywhere else. So mercy. We are not given what we should be given. Right? That's effectively the definition of mercy. The worldview definition and the biblical view of definition. The worldview definition of mercy, the biblical definition of mercy, are very, very close to the same. It's effectively withholding punishment against someone that deserves to be punished, right? And so there's a nice little overlapping Venn diagram that exists between these two definitions. But we're not punished. We're not punished as we should be punished. And as we talked about earlier, this is because of what Jesus came and did for us. But our sinful actions that trace all the way back to the garden, they do not count against us. God is not keeping score. God doesn't even have a Google Sheet open, active, ready to be inputted with all of our wrongdoings, which is good, which is really good, because he would need to be adding 1,000 rows to the bottom of that sheet every couple of days. So none of these things are counted against us. If we go back to Ephesians 2, so we're actually going to go a couple verses before 8 and 9 where we were just a second ago. If we go to Ephesians 2, 4 and 5, but because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ, even when we were dead in transgressions. So here, there's a couple of things, right, that we could focus on. I really just want to focus on one of them. Paul reminds us that we are alive solely by God's mercy. Now, you could think of the word alive here in a few different ways, a few different interpretations, right? Let's start with the literal definition, translation of the word. You are alive. I am alive right now purely by God's mercy. Only by God's mercy am I alive. That's the only reason I'm here. That's the only reason I'm able to do this podcast. It's the only reason you're able to listen to this podcast. It's the only reason you're able to click off of this podcast because you've had enough. The only reason why any of these things can exist is because of God's mercy. And so in a literal translation, we should all be dead. None of us should have even gotten to the point that we're at. But because we have, it's all by God's mercy. It's only by God's mercy. But if you think about it, right, our not being smashed to pieces, our not being blown to smithereens, right, that's pretty good. But if you think about it in more of a figurative way, right, our hearts being alive, our hearts being awakened, right, our minds being opened, that's all by God's mercy too. Right? So the fact that we have any zest, any zeal, any inspiration for life, that's all from the Holy Spirit. That is all from the Spirit alone. Without that, we would be dead inside. We might be living. We might be, just sacks of flesh walking around. But the fact that we can think, the fact that we can reason, the fact that we can love, the fact that we can emote anything that we choose to emote, it's all by God's grace. And it's all by God's mercy. Right? The fact that he did not punish us as we so deserved. So God's mercy through Christ. You know what's crazy about this is, just for a second, let's put grace on the shelf, right? You really can't separate the two. I mean, we kind of try to for this podcast, but they're so powerful together that it's really hard to kind of break apart the potent combination. But let's do it just for a second. Let's put grace on the shelf. The mercy alone is unbelievable. The mercy alone is fascinating. And so for all of my 80s Nintendo kids out there, right? You know what this is like? It's like playing Zelda or Final Fantasy or Metal Gear or Bubble Bobble, right? One of my favorite games back when I was like 8. My mom and I crushed bubble bobble for many, many nights in a row, many weeks, many months in a row. It's like playing any of these games and having unlimited lives, right? To where you're not constantly looking up at the top of the screen to see how many lives you have left, to see how much power you have left, to see how much longer you can go before you're gone, you're dead, you're killed, and you have to start over. It's none of those things. You have unlimited lives, right? So what are you allowed to do? By God's mercy alone, you got a shot, right? By God's mercy alone, you're given a chance at this life, at this world. Now, because of God's free will, you get to choose what you want to do with that. You get to choose, how you want to live that out. You get to choose whether you want to, put your faith in his son Jesus or not. That's 100% your decision. But the simple fact that you have that opportunity, the simple fact that we effectively do have, unlimited lives, so to speak. We don't have unlimited lives, of course. We only have one. But throughout our lives, we're effectively given unlimited chances to make something of that life and to really figure out what the purpose of our lives should be. But the fact that we're never dead because of God's mercy is obviously, really, really fascinating. But here's the crazy thing. We can't leave grace on the shelf. We absolutely cannot leave grace on the shelf, right? Grace and mercy are inextricably linked. So grace belongs with mercy, just like peanut butter belongs with oatmeal, and tuna fish belongs with applesauce, right? Maybe in a bigger way, maybe in a grander way, maybe in a more eternal way, but still, same idea. We can't leave it out, and thankfully we shouldn't leave it out. Not only are we alive through Christ alone, but by God's mercy, we are saved by grace through faith in what Christ did. So, if you've made it this far in the podcast, then you're amazing. Like I can't even tell you how thankful I am for your attention. But if you fast forwarded to the end and you just kind of wanted the little skinny, the lowdown here at the very end, here it is, man. It's Christ first, Christ second, Christ third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and so on. Because of the grace, mercy, Christ combo, and nothing else, literally zero other things, we're safe. We're all safe. We're all secure. We are all saved, which is amazing. So that's all I've got for you guys today. I really hope you guys got a little something from this episode. It just absolutely means the world to me that you guys take the time to invest in my content, whether it be the faith stuff, the fitness stuff, or the finance stuff. I'm blown away. By all means, man, head down to the description, the show notes today. You can find some free stuff. You can find some more content on the YouTube channel, on the podcast, over at livefcubed.com. And that's it, man. I will see you guys next time.